Good afternoon, everyone. I will begin now out of respect for our speakers' time, and hopefully we'll get more and more folks logging in as we proceed. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Meskedem Gabrekzaber, Assistant Clinical Professor and Director of Inclusion and Community Engagement in the School of Evolution and Social Change at Arizona State University. I feel incredibly privileged to be able to provide timely and important programming such as today's lecture, and want to thank all of you for joining us. Welcome to the second event of the academic year and our colloquium series toward a liberatory theory and praxis with our 19th colloquium to date. This monthly series aims to highlight the work of contemporary scholars belonging to identities and traditions marginalized within mainstream Western academia who, through their work, confront neo-colonial power structures and challenge long-standing norms of knowledge production. It was born out of a demand from our graduate students for exposure to more critical scholarship that is relevant to their lived experiences and the times in which we are living. Specifically, I want to thank Tisa Lowen, Aliyah Ha, and Doctors Anais Roque and Nalubega Ross, who worked with me to conceptualize this series and establish its parameters. I want to thank all of the staff members who have and are helping behind the scenes to make this event happen: Nicole Pomerantz, Megan Martin, Michael Campos, and Misa Pham. I also want to acknowledge SHESC leadership for supporting and sponsoring this series, specifically the continuing support from our new unit director, Dr. Ryan Williams. Now, considering the underlying impetus for this series, I, speaking for myself and not on behalf of the unit, the university, or today's speaker, want to pause for a second to acknowledge and condemn the currently ongoing brutal violence in the Middle East, both of the initial Hamas attacks on Israeli civilians and the retaliatory attacks on Palestinian civilians living in Gaza by the Israeli government. If there has been a consistent refrain by all of the speakers in this series since its launch, it is that all systems of oppression reinforce one another and none can be fought in isolation. So I would like to ask us all to pause and reflect before repeating and further amplifying the popular narratives that espouse a false binary and dehumanize one group of people while valorizing another. As others have pointed out, the current conflict emerges from a complex history of settler colonialism, policies of apartheid, numerous prior wars, and failed negotiations dating back prior to World War I. It is a contentious and complex issue. However, this complexity should not deter us from unequivocally condemning the targeting of civilians, forced relocation, collective punishment, and other violence which constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, and actions towards genocide. If we are to meet monthly to discuss our hopes and strides toward a liberatory theory and praxis, I believe we must first unequivocally affirm our collective humanity and right to live without the constant fear of violence. I stand in solidarity with global Jewish and Palestinian communities and call for peace in the region. Now, before I shift gears and introduce our speaker today, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. Please note that this presentation and the Q&A to follow is being recorded. You, the audience, will not be visible in the recording and all of the mics will be turned off. As I mentioned, we will be leaving time for questions after the talk, and we're asking that you write your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to vocalize the question yourself, rather than have me read it out, please write "Ask Live" in parentheses at the end of your question that you submit, and I will call on you and unmute your mic so that you may do so. Without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Ananya Roy. Dr. Roy is Professor of Urban Planning, Social Welfare, and Geography, and the Mayor and Renee Luskin Chair in Inequality and Democracy at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is founding director of the UCLA Luskin Institute on Inequality and Democracy at UCLA, which advances research and scholarship concerned with displacement and dispossession in Los Angeles and elsewhere in the world. Ananya's research and scholarship have focused on urban transformations and land grabs, as well as on global capital and predatory financialization. Her books include City Requiem, Calcutta, Gender and the Politics of Poverty, Urban Informality, Transnational Perspectives from the Middle East, South Asia and Latin America, Poverty Capital, Microfinance and the Making of Development, Worlding Cities, Asian Experiments and the Art of Being Global, Territories of Poverty, Rethinking North and South, and Encountering Poverty, Thinking and Acting in an Unequal World. Dr. Roy leads a National Science Foundation Research Coordination Network on housing justice in unequal cities. Her ongoing research focused on Los Angeles is concerned with racial banishment, the expulsion of working class communities of color from cities through racialized policing and other forms of dispossession. Along with colleagues at UCLA, Dr. Roy has recently led a Mellon Foundation Sawyer seminar on sanctuary spaces, Reworlding Humanism, which is concerned with the place of racial others in liberal democracy. Situated at the present moment of resurgent white nationalism and xenophobia, the Sanctuary Spaces Project foregrounds frameworks of freedom and justice. Dr. Roy is a 2020 Freedom Scholar, an award bestowed by the Marguerite Casey Foundation and Group Health Foundation to social justice leaders. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ananya Roy.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you, Professor Gakuzabra, for that really important statement. It is much appreciated on my part. So hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. The title of my talk today is Research Justice, Organizing the University in Unequal Cities. And given the theme of this lecture series, I wanted us to think about the place and role of the university, especially the elite research university in unequal cities. I want to start with the premise that powerful universities in unequal cities have a long history of extraction, be it extractive modes of research or land grabs, or the extraction of cheap labor from neighboring communities. And it is in this context that I want to develop the concept of research justice, with which we work at the small research center that I have the great privilege of directing. And this includes principles of refusal, accountability, reciprocity, but also modes of knowledge making that are premised on the recognition that social movements, particularly social movements striving for liberation, actively theorize the world, and that such knowledge forms the basis of what my dear friend and comrade at UCLA, Robin D.G. Kelley, has called freedom dreams. In this talk, of course, I want to think from my university, UCLA, which sits on the unceded lands of the Tongva people. We are a settler university whose very spatial ontology rests on land grab. So we are one of the many land grab universities in the US. Though, of course, other universities that are not land grab universities have benefited in all sorts of ways from global racial capitalism, be it from the slave trade, from the plantation economy, and quite actively today from various forms of military imperialism. The point, of course, is that these colonial racial logics continue today not only in the form of stolen land, but also in the political economy of universities. And here I want to draw our attention to this brilliant book by Davarian Baldwin, In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities. Professor Baldwin's analysis highlights the ways in which universities have become dominant employers, real estate holders, healthcare providers, and even policing agents in major cities across the country. And Professor Baldwin analyzes the ways in which US universities benefit from the invocation of the public good, benefit in the form of tax exemptions, eminent domain powers, in order to build massive endowments and accumulate land. Now, I am equally interested in the power that universities wield over the making of knowledge. And in particular, I want to highlight a concept put forward by the abolitionist organization, the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, based here in LA, which is one of my many movement teachers. And that concept is academic complicity. The Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, in their work on the carceral state, for example, has drawn attention to the various algorithms of predictive policing used by the LA Police Department, algorithms that are saturated with the logic of white supremacy and that are produced by anthropologists and mathematicians at UCLA, who have also mobilized the brand of UCLA to set up their own for-profit consulting firms. So put bluntly, what has often seemed to be a fight against racialized policing out there turns out to be much more intimate, that it is something taking place in the labs and classrooms of academic knowledge, in the faculty offices down the hall. And so later in today's talk, I'm going to ask us to think about refusal, specifically the refusal of academic complicity as a key part of racial justice. But let me just start by outlining how at the UCLA Luskin Institute on Inequality and Democracy, we think about research justice. The institute, which I often like to describe as tiny but mighty, was launched in 2016, located and thinking from LA, but with a global approach to race and class inequality. An insistence that we think with Du Bois on the color line, and Du Bois's insistence that the color line is in fact one that belts the world. And in taking a global approach to race and class inequality, we have also insisted on a reparative approach to justice, and thinking very much about the ways in which that horizon of reparation, of repair, of reconstruction are a crucial part of the remaking of democracy in the US. But bluntly, we are inspired by Du Bois's vision of abolition democracy and reinterpret it in the current moment by thinking with key scholars who insist, for example, on decoloniality, who insist on transforming the university as a space of fugitive scholarship and the undercommons, who insist that we have to think about to whom we are accountable, rather than feeling responsible for doing good in the world. We are inspired by Clyde Woods's argument that too often academics studying inequality, studying social death, studying various forms of violence have become academic coroners. And that often it seems that all we do are autopsies. So what does it mean for us to have a practice of research justice that insists, as Woods does, on life after death? And for this, we turn to Ruth Wilson Gilmore and her argument that life after death possibly comes from forgotten places that contain what she calls the seeds of grassroots planning. So at the Institute, we are accountable to the communities and movements on the front lines of dispossession and displacement. We take that accountability very seriously. When we think with Achille Mbembe about a pedagogy of presence, we mean that these communities and movements must have a presence in our knowledge making. And following George Lipsitz, we seek to accompany these communities and movements in our work on knowledge making. Now, I want to emphasize, particularly keeping in mind this manifesto that in many ways undergirds our principles of research justice, that the material practices of accountability that I've just talked about are not easily reconciled with the knowledge power structures of our institutions, especially elite research universities. They require creating what Harney and Moten call the undercommons as a transformational infrastructure that bears resemblance to the many forms of transformational infrastructure that make up the long history of abolitionist struggle in the US. And so Harney and Moten's vision of undercommons is, as I quote, and what you see here, as a fugitive network, right? And a commitment to abolition and collectivity. This is also very similar to how Robin D.G. Kelley conceptualizes Black study as a form of learning that exists within, but is in explicit opposition to a Eurocentric university culture with ties to corporate and military power. Now, in manifesting these principles in the practice of research justice at the Institute and in the research collectives that I've had the privilege of convening, we are very much interested in thinking with, and hold on just a minute. Can you all still see the screen? There we go. We are very much interested in a particular practice that creates what I like to call an inter-institutional space, one that creates a terrain of scholarship shared between universities and movements. A key part of this is that the research questions and projects we take up is homework from movements and communities on the front lines of dispossession and displacement to university-based scholars. It, of course, involves refusing the forms of academic complicity that I talked about earlier. It means thinking about actual mechanisms of accountability. For example, community-based review, including IRB review, but community-based review of scholarship alongside peer-reviewed scholarship. And of course, the redistribution of university resources so that this labor, this knowledge-making labor by communities and movements can be compensated. I want to say that in all of this, I hope you've already noticed that I'm not using the term solidarity. Solidarity for me is a tricky framework and one that requires much more than accountability and reciprocity. I often think about solidarity in relation to the work of Augusto Boal and others in Brazil, Boal as the founder of Theatre of the Oppressed. In this interview with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, talking about how solidarity means carrying the same risks as those that one is in solidarity with. And in so much of the work I do and the work we do around research justice at the Institute, we're very clear that we don't bear the same risks, that there are quite differential and differentiated risks. I don't bear the same risks as my unhoused comrades who are facing displacement and dispossession and who are subjected every day to law enforcement and to losing their worldly belongings on a weekly basis. I don't bear those risks. And yet, what then does it mean for us to journey together? So that journeying together for us has taken the form of what we call insurgent research collectives that come together around homework that is given to us by frontline communities and movements. One of these insurgent research collectives was focused on a massive militarized eviction and displacement that had taken place at Echo Park Lake of an unhoused encampment that had formed there during the COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, our work has taken on the question of death, with unhoused communities coming to us, repeatedly asking us to document and analyze the social death and the actual death of the unhoused on the streets of LA. Today, about 5 unhoused persons die on the streets of LA every single day. And it turns out that the rates of death are higher in the city's shelters and the city's temporary placements in motels and hotels than on the streets. And this, of course, was our We Do Not Forget report. I want to emphasize that in the case of this collective, this is the After Echo Park Lake Research Collective, that the interinstitutional space is around research and scholarship, and it is one that brings together movement-based scholars, university-based scholars, and community residents. In this case, unhoused comrades who lived in and were displaced from the Echo Park Lake encampment. We journey together, we meet every week, we disagree, we debate, but most of all, we believe in being together in community and in producing knowledge in community. What grounds us in this work is the stark inequality of the city in which I live, Los Angeles. So as 5 unhoused persons have been dying on the streets of LA every day, preventable deaths, so some of the country's most expensive real estate has gone on the market. So the house that you're seeing here is the country's most expensive home, called The One. It is less than a mile from where I work at UCLA. And it's a house that went on the market initially for $500 million, right? So that is the stark inequality and in spatial proximity that we are dealing with. In our work, therefore, we have centered the question of death as a starting point precisely to think with Clyde Woods about life after death. Our report, We Do Not Forget, was dedicated to Tony Goodwin, who is one of the many unhoused Angelenos dying on the streets. Tony was a Black veteran. He lived in the Etna Street encampment, which is another encampment where we have been doing work, including collaborative pedagogy for the past year. Our community members reminisce that Tony loved to cook for everyone and kept a food pantry so that no one went hungry. He liked to put on some Anita Baker and groove to the music and cook for everyone. Tony had a housing voucher, but because of race and income discrimination, he was unable to procure housing with his housing voucher. He accepted a temporary placement in a program called Project Roomkey, which was one of the many programs used by the city to place people in hotels and motels during the COVID-19 pandemic. But these were programs also of carceral isolation and surveillance. Tony was expelled from the program for missing a 7 p.m. curfew, and a few days later, he died on the streets. A few months later, activists gathered on the steps of LA City Hall with Tony's jacket, and printed on the jacket now were words inspired by the ACT UP resistance and uprisings from about a decade or more ago. And it was a reminder that Tony's death was an instantiation of organized abandonment and state violence. That in fact, his death could be directly related to the many forms of displacement that are evident in this highly unequal city that is Los Angeles. So in our practices of research justice, we take very seriously these instances and instantiations of state organized violence, and we see research justice as a counterpoint to such state organized violence. One example of this is the After Echo Park Lake Research Collective, and I showed already a few images from the work of the collective. That collective formed in the aftermath of a spectacular militarized eviction. 400 battle-ready police officers who were mobilized in March 2021 to evict an unhoused encampment that had been established at a public park, Echo Park Lake, during the pandemic. The then mayor of LA, Mayor Garcetti, declared this eviction to be one of the most successful housing transitions in the history of the city. That is quite a statement. And he was able to make this declaration because what accompanied the state organized violence was the promise of housing and services. The argument, the liberal argument that people would be better off in these temporary placements and would be in housing, in permanent housing within a year of the eviction. And they would be much better off than living on the streets or in a park. The research collective that I had the opportunity to convene followed folks displaced from Echo Park Lake over the course of a year. And in the 80,000 word report that we wrote, that we released at the 1-year mark of the eviction, we showed how dismal the outcomes were. The numbers were much worse than what we'd initially feared. Of the nearly 200 people displaced from Echo Park Lake, only 4 were in housing, 2 of whom we had helped with housing. 9 had passed away. And most importantly, people were kept in a state of waiting under conditions of carceral isolation and surveillance, in forms of shelter that cannot and should not be ever considered to be housing. Right? But since the Echo Park Lake eviction, what we've seen in Los Angeles is an expanding regime of racial banishment, with the expansion of our anti-camping laws, such that almost all parts of the city are now a no-go zone for the poor, the unhoused, the displaced, the evicted. What I want to emphasize is that all of this requires the mobilization of massive resources towards policing and carcerality. This, unlike in previous times, is not a story about the lack of resources. It's not a story about neoliberal austerity. This, for example, is one of the many types of housing created by the city of Los Angeles in the wake of displacement and encampment sweeps and evictions. It's a program called Safe Sleep. It's basically tents on a baking hot piece of asphalt, cordoned off, 24-hour security, pat-downs of residents, curfews, elaborate rules, at the price tag of nearly $3,000 per person per month. So these are glimpses of the regime of racial banishment, and really for us as researchers, and really believing in the power of research to challenge inequality, the big question is whether research can be a counterpoint to racial banishment. One of my unhoused comrades, who's been a key research member of the Institute's work, Will Sens, who was displaced from Echo Park Lake, talks about the importance of research in this way. I quote Will: "If it wasn't for this research, I think I would have just buried it all. This really was a blessing in disguise, to sit down and soul search about the implications of how these people are treating us. For me, it was a deep experience to really think about it. People are going to have to see that we're human and not just a number." When we first started the Echo Park Lake work, I asked displaced community members what their aspirations were for research, whether or not we should even do it, whether it meant something to them. And they stated 2 aspirations. They stated the aspiration that the research itself would keep people together and allow social networks to continue in the face of dispersal and disappearance. And the second, that the research should be so rigorous and meticulous and powerful that it served as testimony for what people had experienced as violence and displacement and dispossession. The slide here lays out the ways in which we think about this kind of research. We typically do ethnographic work, we do public records requests, we do community and movement histories, we collect and analyze administrative data, and we think very much about what we call these trajectories. What are people's experience over time in unequal cities? But aside from these more conventional academic protocols of research, I think what really matters is the movements and communities to whom we are accountable and those that we are accompanying. So in the background here, you see Will Sens, whom I just talked about, and in the foreground, you see Theo Henderson, one of the city's most important unhoused public intellectuals, who also held an activist in residence position at the Institute. And here they are on the steps of LA City Hall as part of a speak out organized by unhoused tenants against carceral housing, a homeless union that formed in the wake of the Echo Park Lake displacement and during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so much of our insurgent housing research has been an accompaniment of this homeless union. And what is important about this accompaniment is the ways in which there is great clarity in these frontline communities and movements about what social and racial justice might be. So this was from a press conference at the reopening of Echo Park Lake, and you see here ATTAC very clearly laying out a set of policy prescriptions for housing justice in Los Angeles, which is the end to criminalization and banishment, the expansion of community-controlled permanent housing, and the provision of meaningful resources and services, and of course, making sure that folks are able to stay in their homes. So in our work on housing justice with this compass of research justice, what we are most interested in is how the university can be a place from which we are able to dream and make real reparative public goods. And housing is clearly one of those reparative public goods that we think a lot about. In thinking about reparative public goods, we are therefore taking our cue from movements that are also challenging the policed propertied order of unequal cities. One such movement is what you see pictured here, Reclaiming Our Homes in East LA, which was inspired by Moms for Housing in Oakland. At stake is a stretch of vacant houses, hundreds of vacant houses in East LA that were expropriated by the state 60 years ago for a never-built freeway and guarded at great expense by various police forces. During the pandemic, unhoused mothers led by Martha Escudero, whom you see at the mic here. Martha is a social worker whose salary fell far below rents in LA. Inspired by Moms for Housing, Martha and other unhoused mothers moved into these homes and reclaimed them. Facing repeated evictions, they continue to hold strong, making a case for the collectivization of these properties. So as the Chicago anti-eviction campaign taught me a while ago, what better reason for an occupation than homeless people in peopleless homes? Benito Flores, another reclaimer whom you see in the background here holding up that city council sign, refuses to be labeled an illegal occupier. When that label is placed on him, Benito counters that he is lawfully homeless. In fact, he introduces himself everywhere as being lawfully homeless, arguing that he has been made homeless by the laws and policies that guard racial capitalism. Right? So I see our research and the principles of research justice as being in the service of movements such as this that are challenging the policed propertied order of racial capitalism. And this is particularly important because we are, in fact, in the perfect storm of housing and social precarity. Right? The end of the meager COVID-19 protections, looming mass evictions, the criminalization of homelessness in cities across the country, and the unregulated expansion of the corporate control of rental property and housing markets. In cities like Los Angeles, which is a renter majority city, tenants already carried a massive rent burden, sometimes as high as 90% of their income. But what is now happening is, in addition to that rent burden, we have escalating rent debt in America. These are numbers only for California. You can run the numbers for Arizona or any other part of the country that you're interested in, and you will see that rent debt is going to be one of the key sites of racialized dispossession in the years and decades to come. Much of this rent debt is held by Black, Latinx, and Native American renters. Our work in Los Angeles has focused on the ways in which all of this plays out spatially, and the ways in which there are key neighborhoods in LA, Black and brown neighborhoods, those historically subjected to redlining and other forms of racial discrimination, that have high concentrations of rent-burdened tenants and that are the most vulnerable not only to eviction, but to what we call housing grabs, the corporate acquisition of rental property, such that there is almost monopolistic control of rental property in these neighborhoods by corporate actors. In our work on housing grabs, again, this was homework given to us by movements very, very concerned about the aftermath of the pandemic. We show how in the aftermath of the Great Recession, I hope you can see on the graph, the spike in 2010, there was a massive increase in rental units acquired by corporations through the form of the LLC, the Limited Liability Corporation. In fact, research by one of our graduate students, Alex Ferrer, shows that corporate entities, especially investment vehicles, now own about 67% of rental housing in LA. I mean, even quite conservative researchers have been talking about this process as one of equity mining in Black and brown neighborhoods. And what is at stake is what Pamela Stevens, doctoral candidate at UCLA Urban Planning and a researcher at the Institute, has laid out on this map. It is the massive shift in Black life in Los Angeles, with huge losses in LA's Black population over time, with Black communities being pushed further and further out into the far peripheries of urban life. I want to say then that a key part of research justice is being able to do the analytical work that movements and frontline communities often don't have the time and resources to do. And one of them for us is to expose who actually owns unequal cities. So this is some of the work that our researchers do on corporate ownership of rental housing, that in fact what tenants are experiencing are all of these different entities and LLCs. And through that rigorous and meticulous research, we are able to show the ways in which all of these LLCs, in this case, can be traced back to one person. Such work on corporate ownership has become very important in a project led by the Associate Faculty Director of the Institute, anthropologist Hannah Appel, also co-founder of the Debt Collective. And it's a project called the Tenant Power Toolkit, which is California's first online infrastructure to help tenants fight an eviction notice and also connect to legal help and tenant organizing. So these infrastructures of life after death are absolutely crucial for us. And in doing so, we see ourselves in accompaniment of movements such as the LA Tenants Union, which is now the country's largest tenant union. So these examples from our work, I hope, give you a sense of how at the very heart of research justice at the Institute is a commitment to anti-capitalist world-making and to abolitionist practice. Now, one way of framing this could be to say that we are intent on decolonizing the university, but as with solidarity, I use the term decolonizing with considerable caution. So I am absolutely in agreement with decolonial thinkers like Walter Mignolo that a key part of decolonizing knowledge structures, including the university, is epistemic disobedience, including the refusal of academic complicity. I think the more difficult part of decolonizing is precisely the challenge laid down by Tuck and Yang in their seminal piece, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, which is the insistence on the rematriation of indigenous land. Give the land back. What does that therefore mean for land grab universities, for real estate universities, for gentrifying universities? At UCLA, as at many other land grab universities, we've become proficient in the performance of land acknowledgements without any real commitment to land back and land rematriation. And I worry too about the epistemic disobedience piece of this. What does it mean for us to challenge what Mignolo calls our epistemic privilege? What does it mean to undo the coloniality of knowledge? George Lipsitz writes about the white spatial imaginary that structures so many disciplines, including my own, urban planning. And how then do we undo that white spatial imaginary? I've expressed my concern as a concern around what I've somewhat snarkily called citationary alibis, where we see now a new round of scholarship that is supposedly about decolonizing knowledge, and that cite all of the sort of appropriate post-colonial thinkers and decolonial thinkers. But I worry that that kind of critical thought has become a citationary alibi, a set of new citationary practices that give a nod to post-colonial thought or Black geographies or thinking from the South, while keeping intact epistemic privilege and the white spatial imaginary. So in other words, I worry that we have become proficient in the protocols and practices of DEI, but decolonizing the university is another thing. So let me give you two examples of this from UCLA. The first is an endeavor called abolitionist planning that started in the days after Trump's election in November 2016. At that time, I was teaching the core master's course in our department. It's called the Histories and Theories of Planning, and all of our master's students take it. And I'd stayed up all night after Trump's election, rereading Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America. For some reason, that book gave me a lot of comfort and allowed me to make sense of the world at that moment. And I went to class with that book in hand, asking our students how we wanted to proceed. And out of that moment and our collective rereading of Du Bois came a student-organized course at UCLA that continues until today called Abolitionist Planning. Now, I'm sure you all know that Black Reconstruction is not only an extraordinary history and political economy, but it is also a vision of abolition democracy, central to which is the idea of the socialization of land and labor. Now, abolitionist planning was an attempt to rethink the ways in which the university can be a site of what we've called teach, organize, and resist. This was a call that we put out in January of 2017 to coincide with the week of Trump's inauguration, insisting that in our role as educators and scholars, we had to teach, organize, and resist. But what was interesting about the premise of abolitionist planning is the critiques of it that then came from abolitionist scholars, including Dishonné Dozier, who at that time was a graduate student at CUNY. Dozier argued that there is no room for planners in the movement for abolition. In the same way that Tuck and Yang have really argued that decolonization cannot be a metaphor. Dozier argued that professions like planning were, in her words, a central conduit of the very forms of violence that abolition seeks to end. Colonial and capitalist violence against Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and bodies. She drew a distinction between insurgent planners, whom she described as those who continuously put freedom into motion to turn the tide of the violence of land extraction and enslavement, without a paycheck or job title, and planners who get degrees and or compensation from institutions of colonial harm. This was a really important provocation for those of us in the discipline of urban planning, and whether or not it is possible to unmake not only epistemic privilege, but also academic complicity in state organized violence. One of my attempts towards this kind of abolitionist planning was a year-long capstone course that I taught earlier this year with Masters of Urban Planning students. It's a course called the Community Collaborative, an unusual course where half the students are Masters of Urban Planning students and the other half are community members. In this case, our work was with the Etna Street unhoused encampment, and current and former unhoused residents of Etna were active members of the class. The class envisions itself as an endeavor in abolitionist planning, one that meant listening carefully and therefore beginning to unmake the forms of state organized violence, including actual death, that I have already described. It meant thinking and learning from the work of Etna Street residents who were facing the state organized violence, such as my unhoused comrade, Jen Blake, whom you see here, and you see her artwork behind her, noting the effect of LA's anti-camping law. And it also meant thinking about planning and design differently. So our students working in groups with community members designed, for example, a platform on wheels so that unhoused community members can move their belongings in the face of police-led sweeps. They created a street mutual aid newspaper called Street Views. And they also insisted, and I want to go back to this photo, they also insisted that the work that they did had to be reviewed and vetted by the Etna Street community in that process of community review that I earlier talked about. My final example in the talk today returns us to the question of abolition and to perhaps the impossible provocation that is the Abolition University. And so this is a story about what happened at UCLA during the renewed uprisings for Black lives in the wake of Mr. Floyd's killing. And it is also a sort of an invitation for us to all think about what organizing the university might entail, and what it might mean to challenge the university, not only as a land grab university, but as a policed propertied order. On June 1st, 2020, at the height of the national uprisings protesting George Floyd's killings, UCLA administration gave permission to the LA Police Department and Sheriff's Department to use the university's baseball stadium, named after Jackie Robinson, one of this country's most important Black athletes and civil rights advocates, as a field jail to detain Black Lives Matter protesters. Arrested in different parts of the city for curfew violations, hundreds were brought on buses to the parking lots of the campus stadium, where they were held through the night without access to restrooms, food, water, information, or medical attention. The field jail, brought to our attention by graduate students, led to the formation of the Divest Invest UCLA Faculty Collective and the No UCPD Student Coalition, now aligned with the nationwide movement for cops off campus. The question we had to ask ourselves is, what is the university in the time of abolition? Acutely aware that the UCLA administration had made no redress or apology or repair for its facilitation of the detention and criminalization of Black Lives Matter protesters while issuing endless statements about Black Lives Matter, we, faculty and students, together with racial justice and spatial justice movements, gathered at the Jackie Robinson Stadium exactly 5 months after the field jail to take up the question, what is the university in the time of abolition? What is research justice? What does it mean to organize the university towards the horizon of life after death? We wanted to honor detainees, hear their testimony, and situate their detention in the broader context of racialized dispossession in LA. And in doing so, we explicitly challenged the university's mottos and logos, challenging champions made here with our banner, prisoners made here, and insisting that the gathering had to be a collective remembrance of lives stolen by state violence, whether it be that of Mr. Floyd or of Mr. Joseph Reyes, unhoused Angelino, who died shortly after his belongings were destroyed in a sanitation sweep. The stealing of lives, we know, is entangled with the stealing of land, and indeed as scholars of race, space, law, gender, empire, we were keenly aware that the site of detention, the stadium itself, manifested a very particular property regime. The stadium sits on land leased by the university from the Veterans Administration, which in turn, of course, occupies the lands of the Tonga people, who are unrecognized and unnamed in the lease. The sprawling VA campus, which has been federal property since 1888, was mandated to be used for housing for veterans. And yet much of it remains as a scene of what Ruth Wilson Gilmore would call organized abandonment. Its vacant buildings and deserted community gardens stand in stark contrast to the rising numbers of homeless veterans in LA, to Black veterans like Tony Goodwin, whose story I shared with you earlier, and in fact, the growing encampment of homeless veterans at the very fence of this campus. Secret and corrupt property deals between the VA and my university continue to unfold here. So I argue that a trespasser on twice stolen land, the university has become proficient at demonstrating its loyalty to racial justice. When the Veterans Administration was sued earlier by homeless veterans for the misuse of this property, including misuse in the form of leasing out the land to entities like UCLA for a baseball stadium, UCLA intervened in the case, arguing that the loss of the stadium would mean that its baseball team would become homeless. It then named every athletic facility in sight after Jackie Robinson. And that is what I mean by proficiency in demonstrating loyalty to racial justice while being a trespasser on stolen land. In our Divest Invest actions at the stadium and subsequently, what we have sought to do is to make visible the stealing of land and the stealing of lives, but also to insist that we as faculty and students and community members will not be complicit in the policed propertied order of the university, and that we will in fact insist on various practices of research justice that in fact make possible life after death. And let me end with these slides that are these handcuff tiles that we had placed on the ground of the stadium, and where we invited those joining us in this moment of repair to write their vision of what the university must be. As we did so, as you see in the final tile, we were of course circled by numerous police forces who brought out a paddy wagon to arrest us all. But it is in the face of all of this that those gathered at the university insisting on the abolition university laid out the vision of what those very difficult things that I've raised today, the words that I'm even reluctant to utter, solidarity and decolonization, might entail. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that presentation. There's so much to unpack there. I want to give you a moment if you want to take, drink some water, etc. Take a moment, take a break, and invite our audience to please send us some of your questions through the Q&A app. I mean, link at the bottom. While we wait for questions, I have a lot of my own. And I want to start with, so I'm really interested, I'm interested in a lot of things you talked about, but one of the things that I found particularly interesting was this collective planning course that you discuss, and sort of the mechanics of that, right? So just a bit of background: when I was doing my dissertation research in Delhi, sort of participatory planning was kind of a catchphrase, and there were all of these sort of discussions about bringing in residents of jhuggi-jhopris and slums, etc., to help sort of the planning. But in reality, there was this really stark sort of, it was a performance to the extent that the folks they were bringing in did not have the time or the training or any of that to sort of actually contribute. So it was kind of this performance thing, right? It's very clear that that's not what happened in your case, but I'm interested in what I don't know, how the planning process, if you could just talk to us a little bit about how that came about, how that worked, because as you know, I'm assuming here that there isn't necessarily a lot of training on the side of your community activist collaborators. And what does that mean in terms of the planning process? Do you then change the planning process? How does that work?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking about this class, which has been much of my life for this year. So the class was created years ago by an incredible organizer, social justice warrior called Gilda Haas, who at that time was teaching at UCLA Urban Planning, and Ed Soja in the book Seeking Spatial Justice talks often about Gilda and other folks like her who went to UCLA at, what was a very magical moment that created a very different kind of urban planning department. And so when I joined the department after having moved from Berkeley in 2015, I really saw myself as learning from those legacies, right? And we took Ed Soja's idea of spatial justice very seriously for this class. So Gilda envisioned this class, she first called it Community Scholars, where it's a capstone. So this, for the master's students, is their thesis project, right? And it's, of course, it's a professional program. So students are going on to professional planning jobs. It's a very particular sort of capstone. And she envisioned that the class would be made up half of community members and half of master's students, and they would work together for a year. And that the sort of the project at the heart of the class would always be in partnership with a community organization. None of this is easy to pull together. So each year a different faculty member steps up and envisions a project. I had the opportunity to do that this year because we were already working with the Etna Street encampment at the Institute. We had robust community advisory boards made up of unhoused comrades. I felt that we had already journeyed together for a while. The community was very interested in this class and wanted very much to be in this class. And so it meant a few things. It meant that I co-taught the class with folks who were on the ground organizing. It meant that we had to resource a community advisory board made up of Etna residents, current and former, right, who were going to guide the class. It meant that we had to resource all of the community participants, whether from Etna or from other communities and community orgs, so that they could make the trek every Wednesday evening to UCLA, which is not an easy thing, right? And it's not easy to mobilize university resources for these purposes, right? How do you get people signed up as a vendor? How do you pay them? How do you reimburse for transportation, right? How do you issue a check to someone who lives on the streets, someone who might not have the right paperwork, who might be undocumented, right? So all of that to me is a part of the practice of research justice. And I will say, whether it be in the Department of Urban Planning or at the Institute, I am very fortunate to work with incredible administrators who make all of this happen, folks who are committed to actually making this happen in a material sense, right? Not just in an intellectual sense. The parts of the class, so the class got off to a great start. Folks were really excited to be in a UCLA classroom. And then the tricky parts of this, right, were all of the challenges that community participants face, particularly because this became a time of escalating police violence against this encampment, right? So what does it mean to show up for a class if you've lost all your belongings earlier in the day? What does it mean to show up for class when you can't leave your tent, right? What does it mean when you're so stressed out that your health is deteriorating? So that piece of it, I think, became quite apparent that we needed to think about ways in which we could be at Etna without just having 40 people descend on a community. So we started thinking about how students could show up for community night, how we could organize community days at Etna, right? Not just as a field trip, absolutely no field trips, right? But rather as practices of reciprocity. It also became very clear to me that our urban planning students were being very quiet and putting their expertise on the back burner. And so we read together, stuff around how epistemic deference is actually a form of disrespect. That if you can't be in disagreement with your unhoused comrade, then it means you don't take them seriously as a person. If you're just going to sit back and be quiet and say everything they say is correct and is the truth, then that's not a relationship. So there was a lot of stuff that we worked through. And I think at the end of it, the group projects that students did were really meaningful to this community. And what I'm really proud about is urban planning students from every area of concentration wanted to be part of this class, and they chose a capstone project that militates against hyper-professionalization. These are not the projects that are going to get them the planning jobs, right? Standing with the ethnic community is not going to advance their professional careers, and yet they did it. And that's what I mean by this endeavor of abolitionist planning, that perhaps planners can never be abolitionists, or maybe we can never be decolonizers, but I want to hold out hope that a different kind of planning is possible.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It's also always that balance, right, of the expectation of ultimately you're going to walk away presumably with student debt and all of that stuff and want to be able to get a job. And how do you do that when sort of all of the official institutionalized parameters or standards are in direct contrast to sort of the type of commitments you might have morally or ethically. Okay, still waiting for questions from our audience, but as I mentioned, I have quite a few questions, so I'll ask some of my own as we wait. You talked about sort of one of the research justice goals for you all being sort of being able to do the type of analysis that the community advocates and residents did not have the time or whatever to be able to capacity to be able to do, and that data was really interesting in breaking down the LLCs. And then you also mentioned the tenant power toolkit. And it may be too early to know, but I'm really interested if you can talk to us a little bit about ways that some of that research or the findings that you all had may have been utilized in service of sort of, the tenants' rights or any of sort of those movements.
Yeah, what a wonderful question. So the Institute and in my own work, I think a lot about what is impact and influence, right? And when we write our our own cases as faculty, we have to talk about impact often as citation indices and other things. And I'm like, nope, not doing that. This question of impact and influence and accountability all go hand in hand for us. So I'll give you a few examples. So we were, I think, the first research center in the country to sound the warning bell on mass evictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Gary Blasey, who's a professor emeritus of law and a key part of the institute, wrote this landmark paper called UD Day, noting that about 500,000 renters in Los Angeles were the threat of eviction in 2020 because of job loss, health challenges, lack of access to social protection, and so forth. That report became absolutely crucial in every lawsuit against eviction moratoria, right? So it entered as evidence into the case around eviction moratoria, particularly in California and LA. And then there were repeated challenges to those eviction moratoria by the landlord lobby. So, I often say one of the simplest things I can do as a researcher is to take that research and enter it in the form of amici briefs and other things into these sorts of lawsuits, in this case organized by ACLU and so forth, as defense of the eviction moratoria. The other example I'm going to give, so the Echo Park Lake report was and that project, that year-long project, right, which was intense, it was also during the pandemic, was very carefully, we released the report exactly at the 1-year anniversary, right, of the eviction. And we did so because the mayor, in declaring that eviction to be the most successful housing transition in the history of the city, said very boldly, he and his staff said very boldly that, watch us, in a year, every single person who was displaced will be housed. And I said, I want to believe you. How will you know? And they're like, well, we will know. And I said, okay, my job as a researcher is then to follow these people to see what happens. And I said, the numbers were so dismal. It was not the findings we had wanted. It was worse than our worst fears. We, in seeing what was unfolding and how that eviction had become a blueprint for other displacements nationwide, in fact, we knew what was at stake, right? So the report was not only 80,000 words, we also got access, which no other researchers in LA have, to all of the administrative data from the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. So we were able to say, look, your own data, the city's own data shows this. Our ethnographic data shows this. Here is the research. And the release of that report and sort of our press strategies and media strategies around it, our community hearing strategies around it, really sharing it with different communities, I think really had an impact. I think it had an impact on city council elections. Not that we were like, this candidate is great or not, but people couldn't talk their way around what had happened at Echo Park Lake, right? So even now when there's a displacement, I find even reporters having to refer to what had happened at Echo Park Lake and saying, okay, here was, the best case scenarios, these were broken promises. And of course, I think the more accurate framing of this is that this was state-led displacement.
So we have a question from our audience. It says, thank you for this great presentation. In your talk, you mentioned that the LLC purchases of houses could be linked to one person. Can you say more about that? And then there's a second question, I'll just ask both. Also, did I hear correctly that the tents housings run for $3,000 per person per month? Can you say more about this? Is this part of government funding that goes towards housing?
Yes, thank you so much. And in fact, the first part of this question, as he goes back to a question you'd asked that I didn't fully answer around tenant rights. So when we did the housing grabs report, it was homework from community organizations and movement organizations who had already seen the ways in which during the Great Recession, Black and brown neighborhoods in LA were transformed, gentrified, with increasing corporate control of rental property, right? And the loss of home ownership by Black and brown families. So they were like, we're very worried about what's going to happen in the aftermath of the pandemic. Can you all do an analysis, neighborhood by neighborhood, and the neighborhoods of greatest vulnerability? And that really started our work of making visible who owns land and property in LA, which is also what the Tenant Power Toolkit is doing, because at the back end is generating a lot of data around tenant habitability, harassment of tenants, but also who are the largest evictors in LA and who are these landlords. So in response to this question, really what our researchers are able to do is to say, here are 45 entities that seem to be different landlords, but because there is no transparent ownership, this is in the guise of LLC, we can trace these back to the actual owner, right? There is no landlord registry in California, right? So this meticulous work allows tenants to understand who their landlord actually is, and also allows tenants, say, facing eviction or harassment from seemingly different landlords to realize, no, it's actually one landlord. So it's making visible these real estate empires. The most notorious of these are the Wall Street empires like Blackstone that went on have been going on a buying spree. But it also makes visible more local real estate empires, right? And this is often the homework we get the most from tenant unions and neighborhood organizations, like who owns our neighborhood, right? Tell us, who are we up against, right? Who owns this land and this property? So we do a lot of work around that. And yes, programs like Safe Sleep and many of these other temporary placements have become in many ways the order of the day. And that is sort of one of our biggest concerns. So with the pandemic, we saw a massive expansion of government funds for housing and homelessness, right? I mean, the pandemic made visible all of the things that the federal government can do if it's interested in doing it. Like, we had a national eviction moratorium. We had social protection funds for people, right? We had an expansion of unemployment benefits and food stamps, all of the life-saving stuff that the federal government can do if it actually has the political will to do it, right? That increase in federal money, and California also had a massive budget surplus at the tail end of the pandemic. All of that money is being spent on what we describe as carceral containment, not on permanent housing, not on keeping people in their homes, right? Not on placing voucher holders in housing, but rather in camps like the Safe Sleep one. And yes, the precise cost of this Safe Sleep camp is $2,663 per person per month. You all know this. We could be paying someone's rent.
Right.
But the choice, right, to spend on this rather than to pay rent is the crucial one.
Okay. So another question from Dr. Estrada. Do you think these types of evictions and displacements in California, I guess, add to migration? Are people moving to other states such as Arizona in search of more affordable housing?
Yes, another great question. So yes, I think we are definitely seeing people being pushed out of LA. And the pushing out, which is part of the, when I showed Pamela Stevens' map on Black population loss, right? So folks, particularly Black communities, are being pushed to the far edges of urban life. Those suffering from a lot of housing precarity, who are voucher holders or unhoused, are being pushed out into what is known as the Antelope Valley, and further out into the desert, right? Many of them still have commutes into LA, right? I just want to say, which then creates 3 hours each way commutes for people, or complete loss of social network services and jobs. So it's a severing, it's a sort of social death. But yes, we're seeing folks being pushed out of California altogether. I think for folks being able to move to another state, it indicates that there's still some social networks at work in order for folks to be able to move somewhere else. I think what we're seeing with, say, the unhoused communities with which we work, they're being pushed out into the desert, no shelter, no water, right? Subject to climate extremes, because the social networks that would have allowed them to move to a place like Arizona, etc., do not exist.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any more questions from just a follow-up comment again from Dr. Estrada. As of today, interest rates are above 8%, making it more difficult for people to buy their own homes. Are there programs available to help shift these power dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, home ownership in the US is this wonderful dream and illusion, right? So I think, the first thing to keep in mind, and we were talking about this before at the start of before the webinar, right? Is the forms of housing that have been subsidized. So I, as a homeowner, enjoy subsidies that a renter does not. That makes no sense. And it makes no sense in a renter majority city like Los Angeles. Even with rent control, and rent control is only on a very limited amount of housing stock, the disparity between wages and rent continues to grow and is unsustainable, right? So the real housing policy in this country has been around subsidizing home ownership. But as we saw during the Great Recession, and as we're possibly going to see going forward, even this is in jeopardy, partly because, in fact, there is a lot of real estate speculation in the home ownership market. The high interest rates are an example of how home ownership is increasingly out of reach, right? For the generations to come, out of reach, I will say, for UCLA faculty who, often struggle with trying to live anywhere close to campus. And if they want to own a home, that feels completely out of reach at this point. So I think the issue is, if we are to recenter tenancy and rent, what then does it mean for us to have a robust housing policy, be it social housing or something else, and for homeowners to really think about what the debt burden is? Because home ownership, I mean, ownership here, right, is a euphemistic term. That in fact, these are bank-owned homes that we live in, and one missed payment means that the home is not yours, right? That's a very fragile ownership, but it creates an illusion, and I think it sort of invests us, right, in a particular policed propertied order.
Yeah. Okay. We have another question. Can you see possible collaboration with other academics or disciplines that could help with your research, and how?
Yeah, so my work has always been very interdisciplinary, and the Institute is resolutely interdisciplinary. So while my home department is urban planning, I hold appointments in social welfare and geography. My work is rooted in Black studies and feminist studies. In my past life, I did a lot of work on what we would call international development studies, and that continues to shape the work I do. The Institute really brings together folks from a variety of disciplines, ranging from world arts and cultures and the humanities to history. We've learned a lot, especially during the pandemic, from public health researchers and the ways in which they have framed issues of housing precarity as public health with great success. We've learned so much, and I hold a faculty affiliation in critical law studies, really thinking with legal scholars about the law, not as a means to achieve justice, but the law as a terrain of struggle. So all of this remains really important in our work and in our research. And I will say that that I think that the question of mass homelessness in Los Angeles at the moment brings together folks from really a wide range of disciplines. And I see sort of public health scholars, for example, really doing radical work. I see sort of law professors doing really radical work around this. Sometimes the more expected disciplines like urban planning are perhaps doing the more conventional work, and we haven't learned how to think differently about issues of homelessness and housing.
The public health sort of reframing around gun violence, for example, I think nationally has been so much more effective, I think, in sort of garnering interest and from politicians, et cetera. So I can see that. There's another question. It says, hello, thank you so much for sharing your important work with us. We see similar challenges in Arizona, especially around housing, as the university continues to expand. Over 300 unhoused people here died this past summer from heat stroke and dehydration. It is dire. Do you have any advice for students, for example, at ASU, who are interested in becoming more active in this kind of work and research?
Yes, thank you so much for raising this question. And precisely that our unhoused comrades are more exposed to climate extremes, right, than perhaps any other population. So, I work with graduate students and undergraduate students, and we do our work in the form of research collectives, because I think one of the challenges is for students to establish deep relationships with community. We have a sense of a community engagement and an amazing community learning minor, but in our work, I want to see at least a 1-year commitment, say from an undergraduate student or a graduate student, to this work. I want to see it as a journeying with, sort of we do the weekly, sometimes much more than weekly meetings, but it means that there has to be an immersion. I also want to see a commitment to research and scholarship. So the mutual aid work is crucial, right? The being at the barricades, the saving lives, and there are many members of my research collective who do that work. But I'm also very clear that as a university-based scholar, I feel I have a certain accountability to use expertise, and I don't shy away from that term. I am proud of my expertise, and I am proud of that expertise to go hand in hand with the expertise of my unhoused comrade or a movement-based organizer, right? I think it's absolutely crucial for us to think about how we do rigorous, meticulous research, the best kind of research we can do. And I really believe in mobilizing academic excellence for the purposes, right, of the most marginalized, dehumanized communities. I don't think they should get second best research, right? So this
Absolutely.
thing about really the research excellence, like really turning it on, like the most prestigious academic grants, right? The most rigorous methodologies, the most sophisticated data analysis. I think it's our job almost, right, to pull out all the stops and to really show our students how they can do the same.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're at 1:58, which means I think it's a good time for us to stop, although I'm sure there'll be a bunch of more questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Roy, for joining us, and especially in this sort of crazy time globally, to be able to sort of focus and talk about ways that research can be helpful in issues of displacement. Dispossession gives a little bit of hope, perhaps at some point, that this type of work can be utilized in other contexts. Thank you so much again. Thank you for those of you who were able to join us. Hopefully we'll have another talk for you next month. Please keep your eyes and ears open, and have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.